Go to the nearest room, lock the door, barricade it, stay low and stay quiet. That was the message that came over the loudspeaker. I went to a pretty normal high school. Not in some busy suburb, more like a small rural town. Our graduating class was just under 200 kids. The kind of place where even if you weren't friends with someone, you still knew their face, probably their name too. Walking down the hall, you'd recognize almost everyone in your year. It was a quiet town. Hardly any big news ever happened. After school, we'd play ball, ride bikes, just hang out. Simple stuff. And this was about 17 years ago, so yeah, things feel different now. One thing I always thought was unique about our school: there wasn't much bullying. Not the movie kind, where kids get shoved into lockers or have their lunch money stolen. Sure, people teased each other sometimes, but nothing serious. Of course, we had the quiet kids like every school does, but there was one kid who stood out. For this story, I'll call him Luke. He wasn't weird looking. He didn't dress strange. If anything, he seemed polite when someone actually talked to him, but he almost never spoke. I only shared one class with him, a computer elective that mixed all 4 grades. Luke and I were juniors. Back then, the computer lab still had those huge, old, boxy monitors, the kind that hummed when you turned them on. I can still picture that computer lab like it's right in front of me. 2 long columns of tables with a narrow aisle down the center, 4 rows on each side, each seat with its own old bulky monitor humming softly. The class wasn't even full. Maybe 26 kids in a room built for 32. Luke always picked the same spot, second row, farthest seat to the left. He sat alone because the rest of us usually paired up with friends from our own grade. At first it seemed harmless, but a few weeks into the semester, the seniors started making him the target. It began with small jokes about how quiet he was, the kind of comments that sound like teasing but land heavier than anyone admits. They'd say things like, "Man, Luke's so quiet it's creepy," whenever the teacher asked him a question. For some reason, our teacher, who was honestly a bit of a pushover, never told them to knock it off. Maybe that gave them the green light. As the weeks went on, the jokes turned into little acts that felt meaner. One day, a crumpled piece of paper came sailing from the back row and tapped the back of Luke's head. He turned around fast, his face tight, eyes sharp but sad. One of the seniors immediately said it wasn't me and blamed someone else, laughing. I remember that look on Luke's face, like he was holding a storm inside. A mix of anger and exhaustion, maybe even something darker. It was the kind of look you can't forget because you know something in him broke a little right then. I wanted to say something, to tell them to stop, but I froze. Nobody else said a word either. The room went back to the low hum of computers, but it felt heavier, like the air itself had changed, and I had this cold thought that we'd all regret staying silent. One afternoon after the final bell, I spotted Luke sitting alone on the curb, a little down from the school parking lot. The sun was low, the lot almost empty, and he looked like he'd been there for a while. I had an early birthday, so by the middle of junior year I was already driving, and in our small town that mattered because hardly anyone lived close enough to walk. I slowed down as I passed and said, "Hey, you need a ride?" His whole face changed, like someone finally noticed him, and he nodded quickly. We headed toward my old sedan, and he gave me quiet directions once we got on the road. His house was only about 10 minutes away, tucked back on a side street I'd never taken before. During that short drive, we actually talked more than we ever had in class. I told him to ignore the seniors in computer lab, that they were just deadbeats trying to get a laugh. He gave a small shrug and said they weren't the only ones, hinting that he got the same treatment in other classes too. Hearing that hit me hard. I felt a twist of guilt because I'd seen what he went through and never stepped in. But in those 10 minutes, I started to see him differently. Just a regular kid, smart and kind, not the strange loner everyone assumed. When we pulled up to his place, a small house with peeling white paint and a yard full of fallen leaves, I joked about how close we actually lived without ever noticing. He cracked a faint smile and said thanks before heading inside. After that day, we'd nod or say a quick hey whenever we crossed paths in class. Still, when the seniors threw out their cheap shots, I stayed silent. Even now I can feel that silence like a weight I chose to carry. But one day Luke didn't show up to class. Computer class was 4th period. It wasn't until 7th period English that an announcement came over the loudspeaker saying, "Lockdown, this is not a drill." I remember everyone looking around nervously, and I remember our teacher looking the most nervous. She ran to turn off the lights and told everyone to hurry to one corner of the room. Seeing how nervous our teacher was only made all the students even more nervous. We sat with the lights off for a long time. It had to be 20 to 30 minutes until there was another message on the loudspeaker. It was the principal explaining that there was someone in a mask carrying a black duffel bag trying to get into the school. Our school had really good security, and when someone spotted that person approaching the school with what could only be assumed to be guns or any kind of weapons in that duffel bag, the doors were all locked. The school day was cut short after that once a few police cars were on the scene. It was a Friday night, and I'd brought a few friends back to my place after school, just a normal hangout. Later, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I woke to a soft tapping at my bedroom window. At first I thought I was dreaming, but the sound kept going, light and steady. I pulled back the curtain and froze. There was a figure standing outside in the dark. My heart jumped so hard it hurt. I was ready to run for my dad when a voice cut through the silence, low but clear. "It's me, Luke." Hearing his name made my stomach drop. I cracked the window just enough to speak and whispered, "Luke, what are you doing? How did you find me?" His eyes looked empty, like he hadn't slept. He said in this flat, almost casual way, "Through the window, I tried to do something bad." The words hit me like a punch. Right then, everything connected in my head. The lockdown, the masked person with the duffel bag. I asked without thinking, "Was that you?" He nodded once. Yes. My mind raced. I wanted to know what he had planned, but was too afraid to ask. Instead, I asked how he even knew where I lived. He explained that he remembered me mentioning the deli near my street and had ridden his bike around until he spotted my car. That didn't make it any less unsettling. Then he asked if he could come inside to talk about what he'd planned to do. Every instinct in me screamed no. I told him I couldn't let him in and that he needed to go to the school, tell the police, tell someone. Anything but this. Even now I can still feel the cold air sneaking through that tiny crack in the window and the way my hand shook as I closed it. I still replay that night in my head. The way the house felt too quiet after the police left, and how my mom kept pacing even when the officer said everything was under control. I couldn't stop thinking about Luke, this kid I'd shared classes with for years, who used to sit silently in the back row, who never really looked anyone in the eye. It's chilling to realize how close we might have come to something that could have changed all of our lives forever. I told the truth because I had to, but part of me kept wondering if I had done enough earlier, if anyone had. Luke came to me because I was probably the only person who ever showed him a little kindness, and that still breaks my heart. Loneliness can build walls around someone until they feel invisible, and sometimes that pain turns dangerous, but kindness doesn't mean ignoring a real threat. I learned that speaking up, even when it feels like you're betraying someone, can literally save lives. The police told us Luke was charged with making a terroristic threat, and I know he spent time away, though I never found out where or for how long. By graduation, his name was barely whispered in the hallways, like everyone wanted to forget. I never forgot. I hope that wherever he is now, he got the help he needed and found a way to heal. For anyone listening, if you ever see signs that someone might hurt themselves or others, please say something. Tell a teacher, a parent, anyone you trust. One conversation can stop something tragic before it starts. I don't know if Luke will ever hear this, but a part of me still wishes him peace. Even after everything, it all went down in 2016 when I was just a 5th grader trying to get through another regular school day. If you remember that year, you probably remember the wave of creepy killer clown sightings that spread across the country. It was on every news channel, every social feed, like some bizarre nationwide dare. Grown-ups kept brushing it off as a silly prank, but for kids like me, it felt real and terrifying. My school sat in a calm, sleepy suburb where nothing exciting ever happened. The kind of place where you'd swear the biggest drama was a late school bus. That afternoon felt no different, until it wasn't. It was about 1 o'clock, close to the final bell, and our classroom was so quiet you could hear pencils scratch the paper. A few kids whispered to each other, but mostly it was that heavy end-of-day hush. The kind that makes you think everything is perfectly safe. Right before it all flipped, the moment that girl shouted, "There's a clown outside," the room flipped from quiet to chaos. I turned and saw him through the glass. No joke, a full-on clown standing just feet from our window. His suit was baggy and filthy, red and yellow like it had been dragged through mud, and his face was painted ghost white with black smeared around the eyes. That grin looked too wide, too fake, like something out of a nightmare. He didn't move at first, just stared straight at us, then raised one hand and began a slow, deliberate wave. A few kids giggled nervously, but most of us froze, hearts pounding. For a second, it felt like the world outside that window didn't even exist. Just us and that clown. Mrs. Riker's calm broke the second she saw that clown refuse to move. She tapped the glass with her knuckles and said, louder this time, "Excuse me, classes are in session, you need to leave." Nothing. He didn't even blink, just kept that slow, unsettling wave and a grin that felt like it could swallow the room. She told us to sit tight and grabbed the corded phone by the door, stepping into the hallway to whisper to the front office. The air in the room felt heavy, like we were all holding one big breath. When she came back, her face was pale but steady. Without a word, she pulled the blinds closed, shutting out that awful grin, and that's when the principal's voice cracked through the loudspeaker. "Staff, please get your classrooms into lockdown formation." His tone was sharp, urgent. No doubt for the teachers more than us. My stomach dropped. Mrs. Riker snapped into motion, lights off, door locked, her voice low but firm. "Everyone under your desks, now." Chairs scraped against the floor as we scrambled. Some kids tried to laugh it off, but you could hear the fear in those shaky giggles. I pressed myself against the cool tile, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Realizing this was no prank anymore, we stayed crouched under those desks so long it felt like the whole world had gone silent, though later I learned it was only about 30 minutes. When the principal's voice finally came back on the loudspeaker, it was like a sudden rush of air. He said the lockdown was over and that the situation had been handled. No details, just that school security confirmed the clown was gone. We all sat up stiff and confused, the room buzzing with whispers, but Mrs. Riker kept her face neutral and told us to get back to our assignment like nothing had happened. The rest of the afternoon dragged, everyone pretending to focus while sneaking glances at the window. Dismissal felt surreal. Kids chattered in nervous bursts, and teachers acted like it was just another Friday. Chris and I walked home together, trying to shake it off, when 2 girls from our grade suddenly sprinted past us. Their faces were pale. One of them gasped, There's someone in the woods. We both froze and turned toward the small patch of trees behind the school. It isn't a real forest, just a thin strip that blocks the street. But there he was. Same filthy red and yellow suit, the white face paint smeared, black circles around the eyes. He stood half hidden behind a trunk, still as a statue, and then slowly raised his arm and started that same eerie wave. Only this time, it wasn't playful. He was staring straight at the girls who had run by, like he was trying to draw them back. My stomach dropped. All the fear from the lockdown came rushing back in a single cold jolt. Chris and I didn't say a word. We just bolted, hearts pounding, legs moving faster than I ever thought they could. Every step felt like it was echoing in my chest. When I finally got home, I ran straight to my parents and spilled everything. The classroom, the lockdown, and the clown waiting in the trees. My parents immediately called the school, trying to make sense of it all, and later I heard from another kid that the police had been called again, patrolling the area, but they never found anyone. To this day, nobody knows who that guy really was. Was he just a prankster, some attention seeker trying to scare kids? Or was it something darker, something we never saw coming? The thing that still creeps me out the most is knowing he came back after the lockdown, hiding in the trees, just watching, waiting, as kids walked home. It's that image that sticks with me, that feeling of being watched when you think you're safe. And even now, years later, thinking about it still makes my skin crawl. So this happened not too long ago and it still sticks with me. I live on the outskirts of Philadelphia with my son and my stepdaughter. Well, stepdaughter in the legal sense, because I legally took in my best friend's daughter after a tragic situation. Back in 2016, my best friend Joanne was murdered by her husband, and that case ended up making national headline. He was convicted of 5 more murders and is now facing 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Fast forward a few years, I became a middle school teacher at my son's school. My son is in the grade right below the one I teach, and my stepdaughter is just 1 grade above, so their classrooms aren't far from mine. This story happened on March 30th, 2020, right as the first lockdowns were starting to hit. Our school is pretty isolated, about 10 miles from the next school, 2 miles from the nearest gas station, and just a short walk, maybe 600 meters from the closest park. So in the grand scheme of things, we were one of the last schools to go into lockdown that day. It was a typical Monday around midday, and I was teaching math to my 6th graders, thinking it would be just another normal day. Then out of nowhere, my phone buzzed with a notification saying someone was here to pick up my stepdaughter. The system alerts you if anyone's trying to check a kid out, and right away my stomach dropped. My stepdaughter's classroom was just a few doors down from mine, and she had no appointments, no family nearby, nothing that would make sense. I immediately replied that I'm right here at school and no one within 10 miles is picking her up. Alarm bells started going off in my head. Then the woman on the other end told me the person claiming to pick her up was her biological dad. That didn't make any sense. The school didn't even have that info on file. A few tense minutes passed in silence while she said she'd call the principal to see what to do next, and I felt my heart pounding, knowing something seriously bad could be happening right under my nose. Something in my gut screamed that something was wrong. I didn't wait. I called my stepdaughter's classroom and told them to send her straight to me. The second the phone clicked, I was back at my desk, trying to act normal, when she quietly walked into the room. I barely had time to catch my breath before the lockdown siren blared through the halls. My heart dropped. I had the kids push desks against the door, barricade the windows, and huddle in the corner as quietly as possible. The fear in their eyes matched my own. Deep down, I already had a feeling who this lockdown was about, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Every second stretched out, and the tension was unbearable, knowing that the danger might be closer than we realized. We stayed in lockdown for what felt like forever. 46 minutes that stretched into hours in my mind. My heart was pounding, but all I could think about was how in the world he had gotten out. About 2 hours later, the lockdown finally lifted and the police escorted me out of the classroom. Questions came fast and sharp. how I knew this man, what my connection was, and how my stepdaughter was involved. I explained everything, how I had legally taken in my best friend's daughter, and the whole tragic backstory. That's when they told me the truth that made my stomach drop. He wasn't just any escaped prisoner. There had been a prison transport bus hit by a car, killing 10 inmates on the spot and knocking out 2 guards. 20 prisoners got loose, and he was one of them. The police had already been at our house waiting for him, but he never showed. When the lockdown alarm rang at school, they immediately knew it was one of the escaped prisoners. I still remember that sick feeling in my chest, knowing how close danger had come to my kids and all the students, and how terrifyingly real it all was. If they hadn't gotten there on time, I honestly don't even want to imagine what could have happened. My chest still tightens thinking about it, the way the fear and uncertainty hung over every second of that day. Knowing how close we came to real danger, how fast everything could have turned into a nightmare, makes me so grateful for the officers who showed up just when they did. It's one of those moments that sticks with you forever, a reminder of how fragile safety can be and how quickly life can shift from ordinary to terrifying. I still remember every detail, every sound, every anxious glance, and I hope sharing this story makes everyone watching take a moment to appreciate the people who are ready to protect us when things go wrong. This happened back in my freshman year of high school, and even now, at 21, it still pops into my mind like it was yesterday. I went to a public school in a pretty normal suburban town, nothing too fancy or out of the ordinary. We used to do lockdown drills maybe once every couple of months, so when the alarm went off that day, my first thought was, okay, drill time. It was a Wednesday during 4th period, and I remember exactly because we had just finished a pop quiz in Earth Science. Everything seemed normal, the classroom buzzing with the usual chatter, until suddenly it hit me that this felt different. I was just throwing my stuff into my backpack when the loudspeaker crackled and said, "This is a lockdown. Lock all doors, lights off, stay quiet." At first, nobody freaked out. Mrs. Chen, our teacher, sighed, got up, and locked the door like we'd done 100 times before. She turned off the lights and told us to huddle in the corner, away from the door. Most of us were whispering and giggling, thinking it was just another drill. But then came a second announcement. Same voice, but faster, more urgent. "This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." The room went completely silent. Mrs. Chen didn't say a word, just motioned for us to stay down. I could feel the tension thickening, and even she looked nervous, checking her phone every few seconds. Faint police sirens echoed from outside, and suddenly it hit me. This wasn't practice. Something real, something dangerous was out there, and we were trapped inside. A few minutes passed. Then we heard something from the hallway. Footsteps, slow ones, and not in a hurry like a cop or a teacher. Just one person walking. They stopped right in front of our classroom. We were all staring at the door. Nobody breathed. Then came a knock. Not loud, just a soft, slow knock 3 times. Nobody moved. Then the doorknob turned. They tried to open it, but it was locked, obviously. But they kept trying. Not aggressively, just turning the handle back and forth like they were checking. And then a male's voice on the other side said, "This is just a drill. You can open the door now." We all collectively looked at Mrs. Chen, and then she looked back at all of us, put her finger up to her lips, and shook her head no. The person on the other side of the door kept knocking and trying the doorknob, and eventually the knocks got more aggressive as the voice of the man on the other side kept saying hello. Our classroom was on the first floor in the science wing, and I can't even begin to describe how much I was shaking in my shoes. I know, even if the other kids tried to act tough, they were terrified too. Then came the knocking. Slow, deliberate, and right outside our door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Eventually it stopped, and I guess the man walked away, but the silence that followed was unbearable. For what felt like hours, maybe just 5 minutes, we didn't hear a thing except the distant wail of police sirens growing louder. Then suddenly, someone down the hall screamed. Just one piercing scream, then silence again. A few girls in my class started crying softly, trying not to make a sound. Someone whispered that they saw shadows moving past the small glass window on the classroom door, over and over. Every time anyone even breathed too loud, Mrs. Chen would give a sharp, quiet shh, her eyes wide and alert, making it clear she was just as scared as we were. The tension was electric, and every second felt like it could be the moment everything went wrong. Another 5 or 10 minutes passed. Then finally, we heard the sound of police officers shouting from down the hallway, telling everyone to stay in place. They were going room to room, and when they finally knocked on our door and unlocked it with a key, Mrs. Chen didn't even move until they showed their badges. We were all escorted out in a line, past other classes doing the same thing. There were cop cars everywhere outside, even a SWAT van. Another 5, maybe 10 minutes dragged by like hours. Then finally the sound of police officers shouting echoed down the hallway, telling everyone to stay exactly where they were. I could hear their boots pounding the floor as they moved room to room, checking every door. When they finally reached our classroom and knocked, then unlocked it with a key, Mrs. Shen didn't even budge until they flashed their badge. Her face was still pale, but at least we knew it was safe. We all lined up, hearts still racing, and were escorted out past other classrooms full of kids doing the same thing. Outside, it was chaos. Cop cars lined the parking lot, lights flashing everywhere, and even a SWAT van sat ready. The air smelled like tension and relief mixed together, and I realized just how close we'd been to something terrifying. I had just started school, and I already had a lockdown story to tell. I'm only 15, a sophomore at Northside High in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and that morning I got to school early, around 6:55. AUM, I was one of the first kids in my first serial class, which was chorus. Our classroom sits at the very end of the fine arts hallway, right next to the auditorium. And I was just chilling in my seat, phone in hand, listening to music and waiting for the bell to ring. Everything felt normal, just a quiet start to a regular day. But I had no idea that things were about to go completely wrong. After a few minutes, I heard my teacher calling out, so I paused my music and took out my headphones. When I looked up, my classmates were already moving toward the closet at the back of the choir room. Confusion hit me. I had just practiced a lockdown drill the day before, so my first thought was, is this another drill? But something in the way Mrs. Thompson's voice trembled made me pause. I followed everyone into the cramped closet, my heart thumping so loud I was sure everyone could hear it. The door clicked shut behind us and the lights went out, leaving us in near complete darkness, with only a thin strip of light sneaking in from under the door. I could feel the panic spreading like wildfire. Whispered prayers and shaky breaths filled the room. The air was heavy, and the smell of sweat and fear made it hard to focus. Every small sound from the hallway, footsteps, a locker slamming, even a distant cough, made my stomach flip. My friends were huddled close, trying to comfort each other, but you could see it in their eyes. They were scared, just like me. Minutes felt like hours, and the silence was deafening. I tried to convince myself that nothing could get in, but every second that passed, the thought that something really bad might be out there gnawed at my mind. I gripped the edge of the shelf like a lifeline, wishing I could disappear, wishing someone would just tell us it was okay. That's when I heard it. A faint scrape against the classroom door, just enough to make my blood run cold. I froze. Nobody spoke, We all just stared at the door, holding our breath, hoping it was just the wind or a janitor. But deep down, I knew this was no drill. My ears rang with the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and frantic. I could feel the terror, raw and real, crawling up my spine, and I knew that none of us would ever forget this moment. At this point, I still didn't fully understand what was happening. Then the sound of police sirens blaring outside hit me like a punch, and suddenly it clicked. This wasn't a drill, it was real. My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm, thinking that staying composed might keep me from completely freaking out. We sat in that dark, cramped closet, hearts racing, listening for any sound, but all we could hear were faint sirens and our own panicked breaths. Nearly 2 hours passed before the lockdown finally ended at 8:45 a.m., and it felt like a lifetime trapped in fear. Once the lockdown finally ended, I felt a weird mix of relief and lingering fear, mostly because everyone around me had stayed so calm, and that calm kind of rubbed off. I went back to my seat at the front of the choir room, put my music back on, trying to pretend like everything was normal, but I knew deep down nothing was normal anymore. My eyes kept darting to the window, and I noticed cars lining up in the back of the school. At first, I thought it was just the usual pickup chaos, but something felt off. Heavier, tense, like people were waiting for news. I turned to Mrs. Stevens and asked quietly, "Was there a fight today or something?" She looked at me seriously, her face tight, and said, "It's much worse than that." My stomach dropped. I started to pay closer attention to my classmates. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire, everyone trying to piece together what had happened. Eventually, my friend Jacob leaned over and whispered, his voice trembling, Someone got stabbed in the rotunda, right in the middle of the school." My heart froze, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Everything we had just survived in that dark closet suddenly came back. The fear, the sirens, the pounding of our own hearts. And now, knowing that someone had been hurt, really hurt, it all hit me at once. The school that had always felt safe, the place where we laughed and sang every morning, suddenly didn't feel safe at all. I didn't know much more than that at the time, but soon after, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom asking if I was okay. I told her I was safe, still sitting in my choir class, but hearing that someone had been stabbed made everything feel heavier. Some girls in my class were quietly crying, and that really made it hit me. This wasn't a drill, this was real. A few minutes later, my mom called me, her voice shaking. She said she had parked at the baseball field with other parents, all of them worried, trying to find their kids. I waited there, heart pounding, until they finally called my name and let me leave the school. When I saw my mom, I could tell she was terrified, and honestly, I felt the same way. She drove me straight to the daycare where she worked, and the moment we were alone in a quiet room, we both broke down, crying together. Her co-workers came in trying to comfort us, but I had to step outside to get some space and catch my breath. I put my headphones back in, blasting 3 Days Grace just to drown out the chaos in my head and try to feel normal again, even if only for a moment. Later on, we finally found out exactly what had happened. 2 students had been taken to the hospital, and tragically, one of them didn't make it. A teacher had also been slashed by the attackers, so in total, 3 people were hurt that day. I kept searching for more information and found the press conference about the incident already posted online. After watching it, my mom decided we should grab something to eat at Arby's since I hadn't eaten all day. We got our food and then went to pick up my younger brother from his middle school. He told us he had noticed a ton of cops at the school but didn't know why. Back at home, I kept looking online for updates, and that's when I saw it. A 16-year-old had already been charged with voluntary manslaughter, assault with a deadly weapon, and several other serious crimes. Two more students, 15 and 16, were also charged with assault and disorderly conduct. What made it even more disturbing was that someone had recorded the stabbing and posted it on Snapchat. I didn't watch it myself, but my mom told me what she saw. She said the person recording was running, so the phone was pointed at the ground, but you could clearly hear the screams of kids during the attack. My mom thinks it might have been gang. Hearing all that made me feel scared. Scared that there could be retaliation, another attack, more violence. It's hard to even wrap my head around the fact that someone actually died. I didn't know the kid personally, but I've been thinking about him ever since, and I hope he rests in peace. These moments remind you how quickly life can change and how precious safety really is. If you've ever experienced a lockdown or something scary at school, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. And if you want to hear more true horror stories like this one, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.